Our plan was intended to be continuing with the largest service expansion in our literally TriMet's history, including frequent bus lines and our efforts to make the service even faster and more reliable. So we've had to take a step back because of the economic circumstances that we're all facing right now, and in addition to COVID and other significant items that are unfolding. So very clearly, I don't think I have to tell anybody here, these are just not ideal times and they're not normal times. But we are going to be successful. Our foundation is strong. We are making adaptations while we go, and I'll cover a few of those in a little bit. We are working through some of our key principles, are preserving the cash for services to the degree we possibly can, preserving jobs where we possibly can in TriMet here, and also ensuring we provide a safe and secure environment, on top of maintaining, particularly this acute time, cash and financial flexibility, particularly what we don't know. Again, these are not normal times on the financial side, let alone the service time as well. So now, just before we get into the detailed budget discussions, I would like to address, make a few comments on the recent protests and events that have spurred them on. At TriMet, we also share the anger, the frustration, and the pain that's being felt across the region, in the state, and very clearly in the Portland region right now. The recent and tragic deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Atiana Jefferson, just to name a few, has caused justifiable outrage. They should not be the next, they should be the last on this list of tragedies. Well, the protests have disrupted our service, and we apologize for that. We're doing it only in the spirit to make everybody safe, including our very important staff. And some individuals, despite the importance to protest, have caused damage to our city. These acts should not overshadow the need and the call for changes. We should also remain focused on the message of those who are legitimately and peacefully protesting and exercising their fundamental rights. We also know we cannot ignore the blatant acts that have magnified the desperate treatment, the systemic racism, acts of hate, discrimination, or violence. At TriMet, and I know all of our staff feels this way, and the board definitely feels this way, including the statement they recently published, we condemn any of these behaviors, be they deliberate, they veiled, explicit, or indirect. It's just not good enough. We hold fast to our commitment, as is reflected in our vision, mission, and values of diversity, of equity, and inclusion within the agency and within the practices that we employ. Our number one priority remains that we will be safe and secure for our customers and our employees. We must provide that, including being safe from racial and other biases. TriMet is open to exploring also new ways to look at the current topic of providing safety and security on the transit system. There have been recent announcements by the Mayor of Portland and others about that exact issue today. So we want to take a steady look at this, but happy to do so. There's a lot of information we don't know. But on that regard, we already have made changes to the system to make sure it's more equitable and more accessible for everybody. For example, we've implemented a low-income fare program with now more than 30,000 deserving individuals enrolled. We are the only transit agency in North America to do an outside audit of its fare enforcement outcomes to put itself at risk. In fact, we've done 2. We also changed state law and lowered fines for failure to pay fare. We explored the partnering with the City of Portland on street response teams. We added security trained in non-confrontational and de-escalation techniques. And we have removed police officers from direct involvement in fare enforcement. The expiration of the current police management contract is also right now as a natural time to review the structure and the management of law enforcement of the TriMet system, which we will be embarking on. The current contract does expire at the end of the calendar year, being December. We'll use the intervening time to explore a number of options to meet the agency's goal of ensuring an environment that is safe and secure and free from racial and other biases for everybody. We also now look to our leaders of color within our agency and in our community. As as we need to continue to listen and offer our support. And we stand with the community as we work to identify the problems and sincerely work to solve them in a pragmatic way. It may take time, it probably will take time, but we are committed. Now, we're also here to talk today about our upcoming fiscal 21 budget, which is the intended theme of tonight's event. I'm joined, as you will be able to hear shortly, from a great team who will be sharing information on the different aspects of our budget and the recommendations and the recovery efforts. But before I do hand it over to them, I would like to take a few moments to quickly share how TriMet has been impacted by COVID-19. It has hit everybody and nobody is immune. If we look back to February, just before the virus hit our area, our ridership was strong. Contrary to what many media had covered, or was the rumor on the street that TriMet's ridership continues to decline. Well, it was up actually more than 6% over the previous year, and our bus ridership saw its 11th straight month of growth. On March 1st, we rolled out our spring service improvements. That included 2 new frequent service bus lines and other improvements to help our buses move faster and through increasingly congested streets. Then on March 23rd, after Governor Brown issued the important stay-at-home orders, our ridership dipped about 30% initially, and then by as much as 70% overall as the pandemic reached peak in our corner of the world. That is significant and similar to what many other transit agencies throughout North America have been facing. But with it, it also brought an immediate, significant loss of fare revenue. And as the pandemic caused painful job losses and continues to do, it takes its toll on the economy. It signaled also, as reflected in the May 20th projections by the governor, much less payroll tax revenue in their projections. That happens to be our largest source of our revenue. So it's about, I think, 60%. And the fare recovery is from fare boxes approximately 18%. So it's going to have an impact onto us, not just today, but likely into years to come. We're an essential service, and that's a good thing. Transit continued to roll through the whole pandemic, and while at the same time, the impacts related to it of a recession. And despite all that, even from a recent poll from Metro that was just conducted, TriMet remains the highest rated agency of 71% of all government services in this region, and including the federal government. We're proud of that, but we have a lot of work to do, and as you know today, we'll talk about that. Well, and while our service really never stopped, we also we took hard turns and looked dramatic, and we will look dramatically different today and possibly down the road tomorrow. We made immediate changes to meet the CDC and the state guidelines in the implementation of COVID plans. We've temporarily reduced our services by about 20%. And we worked hard to ensure the continued service, especially to healthcare facilities and areas with higher numbers of transit-dependent riders who would continue to need to connect to services and essential jobs. We're not out of this yet. In fact, we've got a long way to go. We're only a couple innings into probably a 9-inning baseball game, if you will, as an analogy. Our service and our costs of the enhanced sanitizing efforts are ongoing, and our ridership still remains low. We remain hopeful, but also we must plan pragmatically and practically to preserve jobs, our service, the cash, to maintain not just service for the moment, but service for the long term. No one really knows what the full revenue impacts of this pandemic are going to, and the economy are going to have for us. I'd suggest even Wall Street is not even sure. So we need to manage flexibility in our financial planning to adjust to the assumptions we're making today. Well, COVID-19 changed nearly every aspect of our operations, and in quick order. We've been able to maintain forward momentum on important projects. The Division Transit project, for example, is one such project. It's currently under construction, and we also just learned we received, as even tweeted out by the President of the United States, a $100 million award for our Better Red project, or the MAX Red Line extension. As noted, these funds, they're also tied to this project. They cannot be reallocated to other agency efforts. We have a lot of administrative hoops to get through, but it's a very encouraging sign to even help create further jobs in the economy at this time. And it will bring great service and help speed up the system and bring more transit capacity on the rail network. We'll also be making significant repairs to the steel bridge this summer. In fact, the whole month of August, it's the largest, what we call state of good repair project this agency has undertaken. About a $20 million project, which will be, as I've said, a month in duration, but it's to rebuild and make sure the trains move a little faster over the steel bridge, because all trains cross it, and it's also ensuring safety for everyone to last the next 20 years. And finally on that, as we all know, we continue to move forward, and also part of the T2020 ballot measure, the very critical Southwest Corridor project. It's not just a project in a geographical line for a certain part of this region. These are investments in the grid of mobility for everybody. Now, knowing the background, let's move on to the recovery plan for 2021. It starts just a few short weeks from now on July 1st, which is the effective of next year's fiscal budget. Again, I do want to reiterate the principles that we've put forward here to preserve jobs, to preserve service, and do it in a safe way, and also along being financially flexible and preserving cash for the short, medium, and longer term to the degree possible. There's an incredible team working on this, and I really want to compliment Dee Brookshire and her whole team specifically. It's been a very intense work. You'll hear from her shortly. So I'd now like to introduce Dee Brookshire. She is our Executive Director of Finance Administration to cover also about our revised budget and how we plan to allocate funds specifically on the CARES Act. Again, please keep your questions and your notes, and we'll make sure we capture them at the end. Dee, I'd like to turn over to you.
Thank you, Doug. So, good evening, everyone. I'd like to talk about the COVID-19 budget actions and how this has affected our internal workings. We had TriMet board approve the proposed fiscal year 2021 budget, and we released it to the public and the Tax Supervising Conservation Committee to review for the public hearing scheduled for April 20th, 2020. And that approved budget for fiscal year 21 anticipated, as Doug indicated, another year of robust growth and service improvements. We spent about 3.5 months preparing that document. So COVID-19 and the governor's stay-at-home order changed everything, and we knew that the entire budget had to be reworked. The TSCC public hearing was pushed to May, and the date for adoption of the fiscal 2021 budget was pushed to June. So in preparing for the COVID-19 budget effects, we had to do everything we could in a hurry. To prepare, the GM met with each executive director to determine the cuts that were available or possible in both the operating and capital budgets for the rest of fiscal year 20 and the approvals for the fiscal year 2021 proposed budget. Planned expenditures, operating and capital projects that could be de-scoped, deferred, or canceled were determined, and the budgets were adjusted. The GM immediately initiated the following cost reduction measures for fiscal year 20 and 21. Hiring freeze on all but essential positions with the GM's approval. We have a ban on non-essential out-of-town travel. Anything has to be also approved by the GM. It's about a 95% reduction. Reduced increases to the regular O&M budgets of 1% across the board. Reduced service on bus and rail without layoffs. We postponed an energy-saving fuel conversion due to the increased cost, and we've ordered no expanded service through fiscal year 2021. So in order to rework the fiscal 2021 budget, staff had to understand the impacts of COVID-19 on the fiscal 20 budget. So the passenger fares, this is what we determined, that the passenger fares for the final 3 months of fiscal year 20 were expected to decline by 28.3 million. Tax revenues are expected to decline by 48 million. We were able to get a federal CARES Act reimbursement in the works for fiscal year 20 at 59 million. Operating expense reduction is expected to be 21.3 million. Capital expense reductions is expected to be 2.8 million. So those changes affect the beginning balance of the new fiscal year 2021 budget. This gave us a new starting point from which to build the revised fiscal year 2021 budget. The next step was to roll forward the new ending fund balance from fiscal year 2020 and incorporate all known impacts to the fiscal year 2021 budget. The adjustments to the fiscal year 2021 approved budget include passenger fares, payroll tax, and other revenues reduced by 125.8 million. CARES Act reimbursements are expected to be received amounting to 126 million. Operating expenditures were reduced, but because we had to add back so many expenditures for COVID-19, and it just remained flat. There was no change in the operating expenditures. Capital expenditure paid for with general funds increased by 18 million to pay for the Steel Bridge project that Doug was referencing. So the final fiscal 2021 budget recap that will be coming before the board on June 24th for adoption provides a total budget of $1.64 billion. The day-to-day operating requirements total 732.8 million. That would be 610.2 million for all system operating costs and 122.6 million for debt service. The capital improvement program totals 377.79 million. That total includes all types of money going into the capital program: general fund, bond proceeds, and grants. Pass-through funds, funding exchange payments, and special payments amount to 18.68 million. Our contingency is 39.6 million. The total fund balance remaining is 471.3 million, and of that, 137.7 million is our unrestricted fund balance of 2.25 months. That's our reserve. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Tom Mills, Director of Mobility Planning and Policy, to talk about our service restoration. Tom?
Thank you, Dee, and thank you everyone for coming this evening. Appreciate your attendance. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you. As both Doug and Dee mentioned, on March 23rd, the governor issued her stay-at-home order requiring folks to try to stay home as much as possible. And that has meant two major things for us. One is a big decrease in riders. Doug talked about that. And with that came a significant decrease in the fare revenue that we receive. We receive about 17% of our budget, our revenue, from fares, and fewer riders, significantly fewer riders means less fare revenue. It also meant a big decrease in payroll tax because as businesses have had to close, that means fewer workers, higher unemployment, and less payroll tax. It's important to note, though, we don't actually even know what that decrease is going to be yet. We are doing our best. Dee's group is doing their best, has done their best to project what that would be, but we are still waiting for that disbursement from the state, and we will, be able to move forward once we know more. If we can go to the next slide. As a result of reduced revenue, we acted quickly to reduce service in preparation for that reduced revenue. So we started by reducing service by 20% on the bus, MAX, and West system. When we decided to reduce that service, we had some important tenets in mind. The first was to try to preserve the network as much as possible. And we have successfully done this. Only one bus line was eliminated. All other bus lines still run. Many of them run at reduced levels, but we are still providing largely the same coverage as we had previously. The only bus line that was eliminated was line 272, the PDX night bus. This was a relatively new bus line that was started in fall of 2018. It was a late night bus to PDX when the red line doesn't run. And unfortunately, it had very low ridership to begin with. Once COVID hit and the airlines were, at least in the early days, largely not operating in much and cutting back on trips, we really didn't feel that there was demand for that service. Additionally, the overnight service on lines 20 and 57, lines 20 Burnside Stark and 57 TV Highway, were also eliminated. Those lines still run, they just don't run between the hours of 2 a.m. and 4:30ish. Otherwise, all lines have are still intact and running, but many, as I said, are running at reduced levels. When deciding how to reduce levels, we wanted to make sure that we could preserve weekday service on lines in equity communities, hospitals, and job centers. So that's what we did. We looked at those lines serving equity communities. We maintained their weekday service, hospitals as well, and job centers, especially job centers that serve, that have a lot of folks who would be essential workers. An example of this would be bus line 81, which serves the Amazon facility in Troutdale. That line, not only has that line not been cut, we actually have added service to that line because social distancing requires us to add additional service. So that line is actually running at a little bit more frequency than it was prior to it. I should point out that weekend bus service on Saturdays was reduced to Sunday service. So both Saturday and Sunday are at the Sunday level. And max service is running at Sunday service all week long. Of course, max service at Sunday service still means, or Sunday levels still means that max is running every 15 minutes throughout the day. Finally, we did decide to suspend our planned expansion for fiscal year 2021. It didn't make sense to try to expand service while also cutting service elsewhere. So that expansion has been put on hold, hopefully just for 1 year. Next slide, please. And so already we are starting to think about responsibly restoring service. But service restoration will depend on three things. First, of course, as the finances allow. And as activity starts to pick up, the region is reopening, we hope to see our finances grow. We expect to see more demand for ridership, and we want to add service. And I just revealed number two, as ridership increases. So again, as the region reopens, we expect ridership to increase, and we'll want to stay ahead of that to make sure that we can provide the service for folks. And then, of course, we need to make sure that safety and maintenance standards are still met as we do this. But as I mentioned, we just don't know when that all is going to, there are too many unknown factors for us. So I wish I could give you a timeline of when we would start restoring service, but at this time, we don't have that. But we are constantly keeping an eye on ridership. We will be getting the finance numbers soon, and we can project from there, and we will hope to make restoration as soon as possible. Also, please note, we are every day tracking overloads on the bus lines and adding trips to lines that have consistent overloads. Next slide, please. So when we are ready to restore service, we are looking to have a three-step incremental approach to it. So I mentioned we cut service back 20%. So we are now at 80% of what our service levels were in February. Our first step will be to go from the 80% level to the 90% level of where we were in February. And when we do this, we plan to focus those restorations on lines that serve low-income communities and communities of color. As ridership and finances allow, we will then take our second step, and that second step will be to go from 90% to 95% of where we were in February. Again, we will look to focus that restoration on low-income communities and communities of color. Additionally, we will be looking to restore service to our high ridership routes in downtown Portland. We expect at that point, downtown Portland will be reopening quite a bit, and there will be quite a bit of demand for more service to that area. Lastly, for the third step, from 95% to 100% of service levels where we were in February, we're going to use that opportunity to evaluate some of our lower performing routes that don't get a lot of ridership. We're not getting much ridership prior to the pandemic, and use that opportunity to think about possibly reallocating some of that service. It doesn't mean those bus lines would go away, but it just might mean that we won't restore them back to the service levels they were before. And then those service hours can be put into bus lines where we do have crowding and we haven't been able to upgrade in the past. Next slide. Okay, thank you. And of course, once we restore to 100%, we will be looking to expand service once again, as we were doing successfully for the last several years. So that will require us to continue to monitor ridership and demand and finances throughout the next couple of fiscal years. Our hope is that within 2 years, we will be back at expanding service and you all will be back riding the bus. However, there are some projects that we are still committed to no matter what. The first is the Vision Transit project and the bus service improvements related to that. Not just the Division Transit project, but all the bus lines that we're going to get upgraded around that connect with it. Additionally, the Better Red project, the Red Line project extension to Hillsborough, as well as I think, as Doug had mentioned, the on-time performance improvements that will be made. Finally, West Commuter Rail will be evaluated separately. That line has struggled to meet its ridership goals, and we'll continue to monitor that during the pandemic and make a decision on when and if to restore that at the levels that it was previously. So with that in mind, that is our approach to service restoration in the coming years. I look forward to answering questions when we are done with the presentation. However, now I would like to introduce John Gardner. John is our Director of Transit Equity, Inclusion, and Community Affairs. John is going to talk to you about how communities of concern were considered as part of this budget process. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom, and good evening, everyone. Again, my name is John Gardner, and I oversee TriMet's Department of Transit Equity, Inclusion, and Community Affairs. Tonight, I'm going to speak briefly about some of the initiatives, programs, and efforts that this year's proposed budget supports through my department. Next slide. Like many other public agencies, TriMet is committed to minimizing budget impacts to low-income and minority communities. So first, I will give a brief overview of our efforts, followed by more details across some of the larger areas of action. Our focus in the year ahead is to ensure that we are using an equity lens to help inform service planning decisions. We are doing this by using our nationally recognized Civil Rights Title VI program to analyze and inform our decisions around service changes, and to guard against any disparate impacts for communities of color or disproportionate burdens for low-income riders. We will also continue to spread the news and increase awareness around our low-income bearer program, which is currently partnering with over 50 locations and community-based organizations. We have even added the ability to enroll eligible riders online, and we expect to grow the program in the year ahead despite the COVID pandemic. In addition to TriMet's reduced fare programs, we are also excited to support the current efforts led by Metro that may bring even more resources to the region in supporting free fares for high school age students and others through a regional funding measure. This year's budget also supports TriMet's ability to continue to work towards increasing our equitable contracting to ensure that there are opportunities for historically underrepresented businesses, especially minority contractors, to help us build out the region's public transit system. Finally, TriMet is looking for even more ways to connect to the community while we move into the second year of working to build out our language access efforts for riders from limited English communities as part of our Title VI program. Next slide, please. As I just mentioned, this year's budget continues to support discounted fare program initiatives. July will mark TriMet's third year of implementing the reduced fare program for low-income riders in partnership with a large network of community organizations across the three-county area. The program has been a big success and has enrolled over 30,000 individuals since it began. Riders who participate in the program can save up to 72% off the cost of their monthly fare. Our low-income fare program is similar to our Honored Citizen and Youth Fare programs and the discounts. We will issue you a personalized hop card that lets you ride Bus, Max, West, Portland Streetcar, and C-Tran for $1.25 for a single ride, $2.50 for a day pass, or $28 a month. You can learn more about our low-income fare program and apply online at TriMet.org/low-income-fare. In addition to our reduced fare program efforts for individuals, we are also providing public transportation fare grants to community-based organizations through our Access Transit program. This year, we funded over 100 nonprofits and community-based organizations with grants that total over $1 million in free fares, and this initiative will continue in the year ahead. The coming year will also mark the second opportunity to provide free fare transit grants to high schools across the Tri-County area through resources from the Keep Oregon Moving legislation. This fall, we will provide a second round of resources through our Access Transit High School program to support low-income students with accessing the region's public transit system. Information for all of these programs can be found at TriMet.org/accesstransit. Next slide. This budget also allows TriMet to continue its long history of leveraging federal dollars to improve the TriMet system for the long term while supporting our economic recovery in the near term. By putting contractors to work, especially women and minority businesses, as well as to working to ensure that people of color and women are reflected on the project's workforce, we continue to live our values through our investments. The Division Transit project, which is under construction now, will provide a new type of high-capacity bus service with faster, more reliable service between downtown Portland, Southeast, and East Portland and Gresham. This project will provide many benefits, including 20 new marked crosswalks and 4.5 miles of protected bike lanes. It will also provide 1,400 new jobs. This project also represents Oregon's largest construction contract awarded to a minority contractor in the state's history, as the project is being led by Raymore Construction, a local African-American-led certified firm. Another opportunity to achieve equity through our building efforts is the Better Red project, which Doug mentioned earlier. And this project could start construction as soon as next spring. This project extends the Red Line service across 10 stations and farther west into Hillsborough. It fixes bottlenecks at PDX and Gateway and improves reliability on the entire system and will result in over 1,200 new jobs. And finally, the Southwest Corridor project, which is in development now, could provide an 11-mile expansion of the MAX system and expand access to education and jobs and create better connections to Portland State, OHSU, Portland Community College, Sylvania, and improve two-way commute to jobs in Tigard and Tualatin. The project is also supported by many community agencies who created the Southwest Equitable Development Strategy, which brings a new focus on the intentional efforts to minimize displacement, increase affordable housing, and create equitable economic opportunity. If this project moves forward, it could provide up to 28,000 new jobs for the region. At TriMet, we are committed to ensuring equitable, inclusionary contracting across all of these projects, and our staff look forward to continuing our work with minority business associations to help champion the participation necessary to help the region continue to grow together. We believe these investments into transit will support our region's economic recovery and get people where they need to go safely and affordably. Finally, these projects wouldn't be possible without a dedicated team of community affairs staff who consistently reach out and work with communities, neighborhood associations, and businesses to ensure that these stakeholders have a seat at the table and that they have a voice in the projects from conception through construction. Next slide, please. The ongoing project stakeholder engagement led by our community affairs staff is just one example of the types of efforts we are investing in to ensure our work is connected to and informed by the community. Every month through our Transit Equity Advisory Committee, we convened 16 community-based organizations to review and provide input across TriMet's projects, services, and initiatives. We also work to convene quarterly systems safety and security meetings, as well as a committee for accessible transportation, to ensure that we are keeping the needs of seniors and individuals with disabilities on the forefront of our service planning and paratransit service decisions. We recognize that all of these efforts require continuous improvement, community feedback, and focus. And in the year ahead, we plan on increasing our efforts to engage even more partners and our ridership as we look to build out a new racial equity lens that we will use to add more analysis, feedback, and information across our policy and decision-making processes and investments moving forward. In order to continue to better communicate our work, outcomes, current initiatives, and many partnerships, we've recently developed a new webpage where you can find information on all of the programs and initiatives I've mentioned this evening, as well as a lot more. It's at trimet.org/equity. Next slide, please. As I end my presentation, I just want to say that this kind of work takes a lot of external support from our community partners and effort from our dedicated internal team. I'm blessed and thankful to work with leaders and their staff across all of our many focus areas. So in addition to any questions you may have for me tonight, I also invite you to reach out directly for any additional information about our work and programs with any of our department leads. Next, I would like to introduce our next presenter, Marla Blagg, TriMet's Executive Director of Safety and Security. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. Good evening, everyone. Thank you. I am Marla Blagg, TriMet's Executive Director of Safety and Security, and I'm going to be giving a brief update about COVID-19 and all of the activities that we've done. I'm going to walk you through the updated systems that we have established or put in place to keep you safe while you're aboard our buses and trains. Next slide. As we have made our way through the pandemic, we have been following the guidance from Governor Brown, the Oregon Health Authority, and our county public health agencies. We are an essential service, so therefore transit continues to roll through COVID. We've made immediate changes to meet the various health guidelines. We've worked hard to ensure services continued, and especially to, as mentioned earlier, our healthcare facilities and areas with higher numbers of transit-dependent riders who need to connect with not only essential services, but also work in the metropolitan region. Next slide. First and foremost, we have elevated our cleaning procedures, sanitizing surfaces on our vehicles and across the system, in many cases, many times a day. With these efforts, we intend to sustain and continue to improve them with a very ambitious goal of cleaning our buses every 4 hours or better. We've adopted new technologies, including purchasing 36 different foggers that use a safe hydrogen peroxide solution to disinfect every nook and cranny of our buses. We've hired 30 new service workers to help with the cleaning and bringing an additional 124 cleaners on board, which is a new position for us to help keep our systems safe for all that use it. And lastly, one of the other new technologies that we're using is ultraviolet technology that we hope to help sanitize our light rail vehicles. Next slide. As I think you've heard on the news recently, everyone should be wearing a mask or face covering while you're riding our system. We strongly encourage you to maintain a safe distance, whether you're a customer, an employee, vendor, or contractor. We've purchased millions of disposable masks, and we're one of the first transit agencies in the nation to install mask dispensers on board our buses and trains so that everyone who rides can take safe health precautions. We're also installing hand sanitizer dispensers on all of our vehicles, which is over 1,000 hand sanitizers when you include bus, Max, West, and Lyft. Behind the scenes, our teams have stepped up to do whatever is asked of them to keep our service and our systems safe, and I've applauded their efforts, and I thank Multnomah County for their direction and guidance during this time. Next slide. If you've ridden TriMet, you will know that we have taken these great strides to promote social distancing while you're at a stop or a station or on board. Riders should maintain that safe distance. On the bus, we've also added a second yellow line that's near the priority seating area. Riders should stay behind this so that we can ensure our operators are safe and healthy and practice the social distancing while they're driving. We've implemented new seating layouts on our vehicles to help promote that social distancing, and it's a good visual cue for you to remember to do that. Next slide. And finally, one of the big changes that you will begin seeing on our buses, if you haven't already noticed them, we have clear plastic operator safety panels between our drivers and our riders. At the start of 2020, about half of our buses had those safety panels installed. We've invested monies to add protective barriers to the rest of our fleet as extra safety precaution and protection for our operators. They should all be installed by early summer. I would also note that further guidance that comes from the health officials, we quickly adapt to ensure our riders and our employees are very safe. And Doug, that concludes my COVID safety update.
Thank you, Marla, for that update. Now it's time for us to answer your questions. I have been gathering them all along the number of presentations. If you want to ask a question, please do so in your chat. You can look at the bottom of your screen. There's a circle with a little blue conversational bubble in it. You can click on that and you can send me, JC Vanetta, the question that you might have. Also, I just remind you, if you have further comments, you can also send them to comments@trimet.org. So let's get going with the first question. And let me pull it up very quickly. The one that I think definitely from Dee and Doug that this listener would like to hear is, I hope to hear more about balancing the goals to preserve service and to preserve cash. Doug or Dee, would you like to take that one?
Do you want to grab that, Dee, or do you want me to
Sure,
jump in?
I can take
You
that.
go first.
Well, we're being very careful about our cash management. That's a little bit different from the budget itself. The cash management helps us to maintain our liquidity and be able to respond quickly to any changes. For example, we had to develop a plan very quickly to pay for an incredible amount of safety equipment and personal protective equipment. And so we were able to do that. TriMet has been fortunate enough to be in a very strong cash position at the onset of this, the pandemic, and we continue to be so. So as far as the other part of that, maintaining or increasing service, what was that? What was the question, JC?
Yeah, it's more about balancing the goals to preserve service and to preserve cash, kind of that fine line that we're walking.
Well, we're preserving service by not cutting back, by not eliminating service lines, as Tom had indicated. We are reducing the frequency, but we still maintain coverage. Doug, did you or Tom want to speak to that part of it?
Yeah, I'll comment maybe before Tom jumps in. So firstly, I mean, when you've got ridership down 70%, that is extremely structural in any service, let alone this business. So I think we all have seen a lot of empty buses running around. So we do not want to be putting even further empty buses out there until such time as demand starts really picking up. We do have a very sizable spare ratio right now, because sometimes you have hot spots for what we call pass ups. So we've protected the ability to manage pass ups by deploying buses at any hotspots. But the goal is to be managing to demand. But we've got to have the users back first. And part of this, what we're watching also is there's a nimbleness to this, where we don't know if there's going to be a second wave of COVID. Early indications are there may be. So we're watching examples like that. We're watching example is unemployment's been hit. People are working from home like never before. We're not sure what the new norm is. And I think factoring in things like working from home where I think great employers like OHSU have said, no, that's going to be permanent for them as a way of running their own services. So we are not sure what the new norm looks like. We're not sure how much the employer payroll tax, the volatility of that. We are not sure of the current unemployment situation, how long it goes, how deep it goes, and how long. When you start to list out this many variables, this is very different than, say, the 2008 recession, where it was, triggered by, some of the housing financial structure issues. This is almost an omni type of approach where there's many things at play, and we are still having to manage the nimbleness, and that translates into risk. The unknown translates into risk for banks, ourselves, people who provide service. So to do it, we've got to be very cautious here that we ensure. That's why you see our reserves up to the maximum. That's why you see contingency around, I think it's around 39 point something $million, D, in your numbers.
Let me jump in, Doug, and just kind of more specifically answer the question. I think the reason that the way that we're balancing service with our cash position is that we've been very fortunate to be a recipient of the CARES Act funding, and that is helping us to pay for things, pay expenses that we normally would have paid with the fair revenue that we're not getting, and with the payroll tax revenue that we're not getting. I think that specifically answers that question.
So I do want to come back to this a little bit, Dee, because this is a really complex thing. Is we are very fortunate to have the CARES Act. Many businesses do not have it. We do, as the city of Portland has, for example. But we're also trying to preserve that. Part of the strategy here is we don't know when that uptick may kick in. It may be months, a year, or years. And we want to minimize how much we have to reduce service in the long term, because hopefully the economy catches up with us. So we're trying to manage the immediate, the middle, and that longer term perspective. So CARES is vital for us, but when it runs out, we are assuming we don't have any more. Although I can say I did speak at the Transportation Committee this week for the legislature, and asked for, with other transit agencies, for flexibility on House Bill 17 funding on a temporary measure basis in case we need to tap into that as well as a supplemental source in the future.
Thank you, both of you. And actually, this question is kind of on the heels of that. And I think this is for you, Dee. Why is there both a contingency and they said reserve, but it's our fund balance of the 2.25 months?
Sure. Let me address that. It's very specific. The board has adopted a strategic financial plan, and those guidelines require us to keep a 3% contingency in the budget on an annual basis. Actually, Oregon budget law recommends that we do that as well. So we set that at 3%. The undistributed net assets, but the fund balance of 2.25 months is also a requirement of our board adopted strategic financial plan. Now, the amount of money that's in there, the 2.25 months, is not going to save us. It's not going to take us through a year, but it's enough to get us through an unexpected disaster until FEMA money comes in or some other funding source comes to play. We have kept, and also we have another issue, and that is that if the funding is not in the budget, we cannot allocate it for expenses. I mean, we can take in as much revenue as people are willing to give us without it being in the budget, but expenditures must be included in the budget. So that's why you see those in there.
And just quickly, Dee, since I have you, one question was, do capital projects each carry their own contingency?
Yes, they do, but that's a different kind of contingency. The contingency I was just speaking about is specific for the operating budget, not the capital budget. We cannot allocate the operating contingency to capital projects or vice versa. Typically, each project carries its own level of contingency depending upon the level of risks that are inherent in each project, and they're set independently.
Perfect. Thank you, Dee. This one for Marla, it's around our COVID-19 response. Do you have any plans to enable rear door boarding to help with physical distancing? Are you there, Marla?
Sorry about that. We planned around rear door boarding a lot, and we talked about it in our strategy meetings. However, the health authorities have given us guidance that they would prefer us to have one-way direction boarding. So they want people to board from the front of the bus and to leave the bus from the rear. They thought that if we had rear door boarding and people were trying to board and exit at the same time, we would actually be getting clumping and it would be more high risk to the riders.
Good deal. Thank you. Thank you. A quick question someone asked was, can we get a copy of this PowerPoint? Absolutely. We will put it on trimet.org/open house. So thank you very much. There are a couple of them on fare enforcement. So I think that this is both for potentially Doug and Dee. Why are you increasing your fare enforcement staff when you're losing revenue and less people are on the buses? And we are in a recession. So there is that. And then kind of with that whole notion, how much money is dedicated to fare enforcement, and is that being reconsidered in light of community demands around Black Lives Matter movement?
Doug, do you want to take that?
Maybe.
Sure.
Doug, do you want to take that one? Yeah.
Sure, let's start there. So our system is a proof of payment system, like most in the United States. We just spent quite a bit of time understanding what some of our costs are to run the business. So we have stopped collecting cash. I believe that is for the short term. In fact, a number of transit agencies in the United States, I go to Boston, Philadelphia, and others, are actually collecting cash back on. We, in addition to the smart cards, we have not done that right now. So part of it is we have many people on our smart cards, in fact, who've paid over a yearly basis and are still consuming the service. So for those who are in need, we have our low-income fare program to help. We also have fare capping as well. So, and we also have relatively low average fares compared to many in the United States. So we need to continue to remind people, to encourage to pay for the use of the system. And so I do not see, for example, the system being free. So yes, we need to collect fares, remind people to collect fares. We want to do it in a very dignified, professional way. And so the goal is to getting us back to services. If not, then the lack of revenue, I kind of look at it and I tell our own staff, it's kind of like a string. If I don't care if we collect fares, then the string is attached. Then there's not the revenues. Then we're back to service cuts and all those other things that we're really trying to preserve here for the short, medium, and long term. So we envision fares continue to be collect, and with that, you need fare enforcers.
Good. And a quick note, Doug, there's no fare increase in this next year's budget, correct?
That's correct. We do have we're talking about fiscal year 21, although are contemplating it for fiscal year 22, but we will not do that without a very extensive full consultation process. But as a reminding folks, this is also very unique almost in the industry. This is our eighth and 8+ year of no fare increase. So it's we've been trying to tighten up as we've gone throughout the years. I think the team has done a really good job in that regard. So so this year there is no fare increase, but it is being contemplated for years ahead.
Perfect. And I would just note, for those, we do not take cash on board our buses, but for those who are looking for a free HOP card, you can actually go to our TriMet ticket office in Pioneer Courthouse Square and pick one up. This question for Tom Mills, if you're able to answer: how has ridership changed between, say, the week of May 4th and last week? Have we seen a decrease, increase?
We are starting to see small increases in ridership. Doug had mentioned earlier, we were 70% down. Now we're in the 65% range. It seems like as the region is opening up, we are starting to tick up. And as I mentioned, we're monitoring any kind of overloads and making sure that we're putting extra buses out there to correct that. Multnomah County is opening up, I think, on Friday. And so I expect we will see a bigger jump, and we'll be prepared for that.
Thank you. And maybe you could answer this one because this question came in during your presentation, Tom. It says, when you say equity communities, do you mean communities of color, low-income communities, houseless communities? What does equity communities mean? And maybe, John, you can also chime in too.
Yeah, that's a great question, and pretty much so all of the above, and then some. So when we look at equity, we look at 10 different factors. We have what we call an equity index. This was created by our Transit Equity Advisory Committee and John Gardner's staff together. It is also updated regularly as demographics change. And we apply that index to all of our bus lines and determine what percentage of the bus line is serving equity communities. The higher the percentage, then the kind of more important it is that we preserve that service. And so that is exactly what we used when determining the what lines to preserve. Real quickly, I'm probably going to get them all wrong, but some of them I won't remember them all. But the 10 factors are low income, people of color, seniors, people with disabilities, youth, affordable housing, various services. I can't remember them all, but we can definitely get that sent out if you would like.
Perfect. John Gardner, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think that's right. If you want to go really deep, you can go online and look at our Title VI program, which has that plus other considerations we apply to any sort of service changes. So in the equity index, when it was first developed, was so well thought of that it was adopted by the city of Portland. But I think that was when we had 6, and we've added the other elements that Tom spoke to. So we have quite a comprehensive review of impacts of any service change, any fare, potential fare increases, or any of the policies. So we're very excited about that tool, and we invite others to consider to use that. And I believe PBOT's using it as well when they think of some of the planning they're doing currently.
Perfect. Tom, I have another question for you. Have you considered using variable fares, or maybe this is a Doug question too, using variable fares to encourage off-peak ridership and possibly avoid having to add buses simply to keep social distancing on the bus? Tom, do you want to?
Sorry, I wasn't sure which one of us was going to answer that.
Go ahead.
So,
you want to try there? You want to go first?
Sure. Well, the answer is no. We are not using variable fares. You use variable fares when you're trying to attract people to certain times of the day, and frankly, in the middle of the day is actually when we're getting the ridership. So I guess you would want to use it during the peaks, but the peaks are really for people getting to jobs, and there's just not the demand for that right now. But even more importantly, it kind of gets back to what Doug was saying. Fares are part of our revenue, and that revenue sustains our service. So we have a lot of opportunities for people to register with low-income fare as they need to. But those who can afford to pay the full fare, we would like them to pay that full fare so that that revenue can sustain the service. If fares go down, as we are seeing today, then we have to make cuts to the service. So we're not looking to reduce our fare revenue. We want more to come in, but we want it to come in from those who can afford to pay it, and those who struggle can take advantage of the low-income fare.
I'm just going to add in here, John, that I've had a lot of experience with variable pricing, being in the oil industry and other places where you're looking at products and services, the airline industries, and where there's a downside for discounting to the advantage of the customer. Sometimes there also can be, you don't do variable faring when you've got fare capping. If you're going to go on the downside, you also be able to play on the supply side and the upside. So that means people, if we're going to get into a variable fare conversation, it goes on both sides of the base fare. Otherwise, it's just a discount.
Nice. Doug, since I have you up, I'm going to ask you this question because I think this one's kind of interesting. How can TriMet use this crisis to vault into a more dynamic mobility tool?
I love that question. It's we don't have enough time for this answer. This is a great question. And whoever's asking, I'd love to follow up with them on this because we may need help. Firstly, the agency, if we go back about a year or so ago through the board's wisdom, we moved our mindset from a transit agency to an integrated mobility agency. So, okay, what does that mean? So as we work with Ubers, Lyfts, cycling, as we integrate how we get around, I think technology now, because memory is cheap and technology, we can integrate the experience. And I was actually fortunate to be asked about 5 CEOs to present to the head of the FDA just about 3 weeks ago, and this topic came up. And part of it is, I think we're going to have to work harder to redefine our experience. I think we're going to lose riders because of people working from home that may not be coming back. And if we don't double down on the safety security side, and particularly the cleaning side, we know people are very reticent, and I understand why, to not come back. They're afraid of the human interactions and the spread of virus. So our base, we're going to have to hit our base even stronger. That's why we're spending like $10 million more on cleaning at a time when we don't have the revenues coming in. Because even if we gave it away free and they don't feel safe and secure on their terms, they're not coming, in my mind. And so technology, I think, is a really important piece. We've just got a federal grant, a partnership with a Visa and many others to look at some of the next generation of fare integration and moving to an experience-based model to get people the real big market share, or the people who are not using us are actually in their cars. And fuel prices are low right now, and that sometimes has a relationship to when transit demand goes up and down. And so I think we're going to have to look and redefine products in the years ahead, not the months, because these things take a long time, to get an integrated plan, book, pay approach through the technologies. So the experience, it has less points of stress. Part of that also to the question is unrelated to COVID and the economy. This is why it was so foundational. It was very evident to me when I arrived in this region 4.5 years ago. The system is too slow here. That's why I know it painful for some. Wanted to close some train stations downtown to speed up the system. In the red line to speed it up with more trains and cars getting over the steel bridge faster. We're looking at in the good work by Chloe Udaly and the team at PBOT on the Rose lanes by accelerating up. This region has to speed itself up to actually get a modal share far greater than 4%. Right now, we're going to be challenged at 4%. But long term, the T2020 investments and others. So there's a technology piece. I also think there's another products piece. We're actually out looking right now, and in the final stages, hopefully it comes out, of looking at a headset tour using some of the historians that we've been interviewing in the region that and can start using in our off-peak periods, moving from a commute experience to an educational experience. Hopefully that'll be in multi-languages. So we're looking at products to drive experience and revenue for new immigrants, for educational field trip tours, to connect transit culture and the fabric. It's more than just a social carrier. It's actually an experience carrier in a positive way. So, and I think we're going to have to learn to not just be a communicator. We're actually looking at how do we actually market our business and our practices better, including looking at loyalty programs. I came from an industry many years ago that we introduced the first loyalty program, literally in Canada. And we literally got a 5% market share or modal share increase with no capital. And so loyalty can work. I bet you many people on this call have a loyalty card. So we're exploring even things like that. So so stay tuned. We're considering things like can you get Wi-Fi on the system, not where we pay, but maybe our suppliers pay, things of that nature. So we're looking at creative alternatives here for the future to increase the value proposition fundamentally for what people pay.
Perfect. Thank you, Doug. This question for Dee. When will we know the financial impacts / revenue impacts from payroll tax during this time?
Well, the estimates that we're using for our fiscal year 2021 budget were developed in part from our own experience, as well as an economic report that was developed just for us related to payroll tax by Eco Northwest. They're one of the top economists in the area. And their indications are that there is going to be a significant loss. Now, remember that payroll tax is a lagging indicator. People are employed, then the reports from how much the wages were is reported, and then we get paid. So it's about a month or two behind. People it will begin to decline as it shows the people who have been laid off, the people who are not being paid. Those are the significant changes. And also there will be changes. Some companies, some of our bigger companies are offshoring some of their functional units. And so employees are not cited here in Oregon, and we won't be getting that money either. But we expect to know if the projections are correct over the summer, and as time goes by, we'll see the effects of the payroll tax reductions.
Thank you, Dee. And for those who are joining in, if you have a question, you can actually send it to me via chat to JC Vanetta. There is a chat bubble down on the bottom of your screen on the WebEx, and you can send me a question for me to ask the panel. This question is for Marla. Previous guidance we got earlier in the pandemic said that we should hold back so that essential riders could get to their jobs, or for people to get to medical appointments or essential services. So that way the bus doesn't pass them up because of limited capacity. Is that still the approach riders should take right now? Is this the cue the rest of us should take?
Just for clarification, JC, they're asking if we should ride public transit for our essential needs?
Yes, and or if we should hold back so we can preserve the room for those who really need the transit service.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. Multnomah County is one of the last counties to roll out and reopen Oregon. I think we are asking people, if you know that your particular line is busy and it is experiencing pass-ups, to have some consideration if you're just using transit not for essential work. However, if you are, taking MAX, we're not finding that MAX is at capacity, so we encourage you to take MAX. There's more room, and obviously there's just not as much room with buses. Now, I mentioned earlier about our cleaning procedures and how we're getting to a target of doing cleaning for our buses every 4 hours. That will enable us to actually reduce some of the physical distancing. So we are looking forward in the very near future to change that 6-foot rule to a 3-foot rule, and that will help allow us to have more riders board our buses so that we can carry more riders as more of Reopen Oregon happens. We know when people start moving around and people are going back to work, that physical distancing is going to be a challenge. So we do have plans on making those arrangements in the very near future so we won't have to have those pass-ups.
Perfect. Thank you, Marla.
I might just add, JC, this is also part of what included as part of the governor's order. So we don't want to turn it on to 3 feet until we're ready with the standards that Marla's really nicely articulated here earlier. So we're getting ready with all the the signage, the announcements, all the things, the bus barriers, etc. So the cleaners are of course foundational to that. So it's just somewhere in, I'll call it in early July, likely once the cleaners get on, we'll be making those transitions to 3 feet.
Nice. This question I think is probably for Tom. How will TriMet uphold its mission for equitable transport service if widespread stigma hampers demand for bus, MAX, West? Will TriMet consider fleets of smaller vehicles or other options to preserve service at a lower ridership capacity?
Thanks, JC. That's a question we get. We used to get that question even before the pandemic. Why don't you run smaller vehicles? The truth of the matter is the vast majority of the cost of providing the service is to pay for the operator. The vehicle itself is a relatively small portion of the overall operating cost. And so, if we were to, even if ridership were to shrink, let's say, shrinking the vehicle doesn't save us a significant amount of money because the primary cost is the operator themselves, and we would still have the same operator. Additionally, by having larger vehicles, when ridership does grow, we can accommodate that with the vehicles we have. We don't have to go out and buy more vehicles and get more operators, which are, again, the primary part of the cost. So I definitely hear what you're saying. Our hope is really to grow ridership, not to prepare for a day when we have less ridership. Doing so would actually wind up costing us more money.
JC, I might just add to this. This is a bit akin to, I think, to build on Tom's point. It's, if you look at Southwest Airlines, they fly only 737 jets. So the more you can standardize your fleet, firstly, our fleets typically run around 16 years for the average age of a bus. Now, we're running electric buses, they're scheduled around 12, but that will improve over time, we believe. So we want to standardize the fleet as much, because if not, there's training for every operator. There's all these kind of parts. There's just the cost tail behind the scenes is quite significant to alter your fleets of significant mixtures. So the user wouldn't see that, but we sure do in a cost-effective way. So the one difference where there is a sizable cost difference is actually running a articulated fleet. But between a 20, 30-foot shuttle, not so much. It's the labor point that Tom acknowledged. So.
And Doug, since I have you, this question might be best for you. Is TriMet preparing for a long-term strategy in case ridership never returns to normal, or might be slow to return to normal?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I have asked our Executive Director of Public Affairs, Bernie Bottomley, to head up a ridership recovery review. So we are embarking on that now, and it gets to some of the questions that were asked earlier. How during the crisis, where can we use technology? How do we, where can we look to do things maybe different than we have contemplated in the past? So, and what are those methods? So we are currently undertaking that right now. But part of it will also be the continued expansion of the Division Transit Project will bring ridership, the Southwest Corridor, the Red Line. There are a number of things that are in the pipeline right now that we are looking, their investments far to look beyond COVID, let alone an economic recovery. So some of them we're going to say, look at what can we do today, more so in addition to just spending capital. We've got to be careful on that.
Good. Tom, this one's back at you. How is TriMet working to improve system speed within the city rather than just to its outskirts? It's difficult for me as a Portland City resident to get behind the Southwest Corridor project, and it's advertised 30 minutes from Bridgeport to downtown when it takes an hour plus to get from Northeast 60th to Selwood. What ideas are in the pipeline to address this issue?
Great, thank you for that question. Well, we have some pretty good news for you, I hope. So Doug mentioned it earlier, we've been working with Commissioner Udaly and PBOT staff on developing the Rose lanes in the region, actually in the city of Portland, and largely in inner Portland, where we experience the most congestion. The Rose lanes are bus lanes that help our buses move through traffic and past congestion. Not only by doing that, do we increase the speed of the bus, but we also increase the reliability of the bus. So not only are you traveling faster, but you're waiting less time. I'm excited to tell you specifically in regards to traveling from northeast to southeast, that this summer, PBOT will be putting in Rose lanes along MLK, Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and Grand Avenue. That obviously won't get you all the way to Selwood, but it will, if you're a rider of the 6, it means that you're going to be looking at a faster trip. Additionally, in regards to Southwest Corridor, that is part of a larger package that we hope to be on the ballot this November, that Metro will be putting on the ballot. And that includes a number of corridors in the city of Portland that would kind of get the bus rapid transit treatment. So they would have transit priority improvements, as well as larger vehicles, and be able to, as well as some nicer shelters. So that would also speed up your travel and increase reliability. Lastly, I would say in regards to the Southwest Corridor, there is the speed factor of riding max between Tualatin and downtown Portland. But additionally, as I mentioned earlier, reliability. If you ride the 96, which operates on I-5, you can get stuck in traffic, and one day it takes a half hour to get there. The next day it takes 50 minutes to get to downtown. So there's a lot of advantage in that as well. Thanks.
I might add to that, JC, in the longer term, what you'll see on the 2020 ballot, I'm personally of the belief, as I've said, particularly in the downtown core, as the person who wrote the question in, we need to look at max and actually study how do you go underneath, not have a steel bridge. We have to speed up even going. At some point, I believe the region's going to have to go underground. In fact, the existing tracks could be freed up for future streetcar use, things of that nature. But I do believe we have got to continue those even longer term investments. Like at some point, we're going to have to replace that steel bridge as a region. But it's a facility. These investments are not just for one individual trip. You know, about 70% of trips in Clackamas County, they leave every day. Troutdale, they come in and vice versa, in East County. So this is continuing to make investments to complete the grid. So if you do need to move, whether it be if you're in Portland and you need to get down to Bridgeport, you can do that. It may not be a consistent daily trip for you, but the whole region gets to use it. It's not just built for those people who live there. So most large cities really focus on completing that grid.
This question, probably for you, Doug, maybe a little bit for you, Dee. If the revenue-paying customers bring in less than 15% to your budget and you're experiencing a loss in riders, why would you still need fare enforcers? Proof of paying is different than fining someone for not paying.
Well, the number that we are talking about for 18% of our revenue budget is about $120 million. And so that's a big piece of what it costs us to run our system. So that's mainly why we're interested in making sure we collect as much as we can. However, our estimates are that the amount of money that we're not collecting for fares, based on statistics and estimates, is about 11%. So theoretically, we could be collecting an additional 15 million in revenues if we were able to close the gap on the folks that are choosing not to pay. Doug, did you want to add more?
Yeah, this kind of teases at do you have a free system or not, right? And so there is a cost to have a system where people pay, because the agency also needs those revenues to provide the services that we provide. So there's also there's a trust side to this that, I have to pay my utility bill every month. I have to pay my water bills. I'm of the belief our service is of value. If somebody has economic need, then we have ways to help them. But that not necessarily is everybody. There's a whole lot of people who can afford to pay and in fact do. So as opposed to really get into the break-even economic side of it, I think the end goal is to grow the pie, not get to a break-even where you have to have those conversations. Because if you're actually getting to that level, then you're questioning, how much service do you actually put out there? So it becomes a bit of a spiral circle downwards that you end up with less service than you need. So I'd rather spend our time, how do you grow this business? How do you get people with all the alternatives that you go? So our 4% modal share goes to 14% modal share. So to do that, most systems in the world are not free. There is a payment type of mechanism for it. So acknowledging there's different beliefs on this, but I think our service is of value to most people, and they do have the ability to pay.
Perfect, thank you. This is a question for you, Dee, and I don't know if you know the line items this well, but do you know what the budget is for out-of-town travel?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I'm very happy to provide it later.
Oh, no worries. I thought you might, because I know you know the budget. That's a number that is definitely in the weeds.
It's in the neighborhood of about $300,000.
Okay. I think so. We're at about 7:26, and I'm not seeing any other questions.
6:26, I think.
Forgive me, 6:26. Yes.
JC, if I may.
Yes.
Kathy, sorry, I didn't know if board members can also chime in before we end and just give some thoughts.
Absolutely. I have one question left, and then I think
Sure.
Doug can take it from there. Does that work? So Doug, one last question that I have. The City of Portland is giving community organizations vouchers for Uber, Lyft, and taxis. Are there transit needs that could be more effectively served in this way during this particular time, as painful as that might be?
You know, I don't know that. To be honest, we've been so busy on managing the existing and how do we keep up. I'm not sure that that's something where is probably our best value for dollar right now. There might be 1 and 2 trips. One of the things I will say in the legislation, or the, excuse me, not legislation, the order the governor came out with was in fact, if somebody gets on the bus, maybe who is displaying significant health issues and heading to the hospital, then in fact, it may be in the best interest for the person, if they're willing to step off the bus, then we, TriMet, will pay for them, Uber, Lyft, taxi, or otherwise, to get them to that hospital in the spirit of protecting against the spread of virus. So that's one example where we are looking at that right now.
Perfect, Doug, and you can take it from there however you want to round out the night.
I had a couple comments, so I just wanted to turn over to Kathy. Are you there, Kathy?
Yes.
There.
Yes, here we go. No, thank you, Doug, as well as all the other panelists and folks who've joined in today. I just wanted to respond back to some of the questions that folks had around, you know, fair enforcement, as well as our response in particular to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I'll just share that, you know, from my perspective, we are not living in normal times right now. You know, nor, in my opinion, should we operate from, you know, the same things that we were doing as an agency. I feel like the call from action, especially from Black community leaders and Black community organizations, have been very clear in terms of their demands for a better, equitable transit system, and one that specifically calls out fair enforcement and the ways that communities of color are being impacted and being treated in our on our system. So I want to call that out. I don't want to brush that aside, and I don't want to continue business as usual, because, like I said, we are not living in normal times. I think we have an opportunity as a board to think about the ways that we are enforcing these things, especially for communities of color. And, you know, I will also say that, you know, part of the problem here is institutional racism. And as much as we want to develop a DEI program and talk about diversity and equity, we're not going to be able to do that until we also talk about policing on our system and ways that we are using fair enforcers to continue to police our communities. And again, you know, this is my personal perspective, but you know, I'm watching carefully to the demands that organizations have brought forward, and I believe that this is something that we need to continue to not only listen to, but to respond to. And our budget needs to reflect, again, the values of the most marginalized in our community. So I just felt like I needed to say that. I think that, you know, we have an opportunity for next year's budget to really take a look at fair enforcement and what type of dollars those activities are going to. And we have an opportunity to shift those resources to programs that help Black and Brown communities of color. So that's just my thoughts, and you know, from one board member, but I just felt like I needed to say that today.
Thank you, Kathy. Linda, any comments you wanted to make? We're going to close off here at 6:31. Or Lori?
No comments for me. Thank you, Doug.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody for participating. Those were some great questions, and thanks so much to the staff for the thorough presentation. I don't have anything to add. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, thank you to everybody tonight. It is said, I said it's 6:31. I do want to thank all the staff that's put a lot of time into this, and this is all part of a great conversation on many, many fronts. And as most people know, we run a very complex organization. It's a very impactful organization. We know that, and we want to keep these discussions going on many fronts. So thank you all for tonight. This will be actually, we had a TSCC hearing, which was a public hearing. The Spanish last night, tonight, and then one tomorrow. So these will all go into factor into the conversation ultimately, or resulting a draft or a proposed resolution for the board for approval for July 1st. So thank you all for your personal time tonight, and thank you for using TriMet. JC, we'll sign off now.
Yes, I just wanted to let everyone know if you had further questions or comments, to email them at comments@trimet.org so that we can help you. Also, all of our information will be posted at trimet.org/open house. Again, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you all.
Good night.